Okay, thank you. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order by 7:06 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Rod and Connor, who are in the back working behind the scenes to produce our board meeting on Channel 20. So we thank you for that. As always, great job. So we'll move right on to petitions and communications portion of our agenda, where we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communication portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it's appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meeting in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such meetings. I'll call 2 names, and the second person should come towards the front so we can devote the most time to the public comments. We have a clock on the wall to help you with your time, and we thank you for your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. Our first speaker tonight is Jenny Keffer. If you'll turn the microphone on.
Perfect. Good evening. I'm Jenny Keffer, principal of Auburn High School, and I'm here with Mr. Dylan Ladd, one of our choir teachers at Auburn. We brought for you a few students tonight. Please stand when I say your name. I have Malachi, Noah, Robert, Jamia, and Lanijah. A few weeks ago, we started to develop some singing telegrams, and we sang our first telegram at Dr. John Dorsey's house from Mercy Health, and that performance was put on Facebook, and you may have seen we have almost 30,000 views on our RPS 205 Facebook page from that performance. From that, a teacher has sponsored a performance for all of you tonight. So I want you to know one thing about these students, and that is they are fundraising for students to attend Carnegie Hall this spring. These students do not get to attend Carnegie Hall. They are doing this, donating their time and their talent to pay it forward to the next generation of Kappa singers at Auburn High School. So without further ado, here you go.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we see. No, I won't be afraid. 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 Just as long as you stand by me. And darling, stand by me. Darling, stand by me. Darling, stand by me. Darling, stand by me. The sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, dreams should crumble to the sea. I won't cry, I won't, no, I won't, no, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear just as long as you stand by me. And darling, stand by me, darling, stand by me, darling, stand by me, darling, stand by me.
Fabulous. Absolutely. Absolutely incredible. And the most important thing you all need to know, put this on your phone or write this down. There is a website that you can go to called kappachoir.com/donate, which is the fundraiser for the trip to Carnegie Hall that Mr. Ladd has coordinated. And our superintendent has made a pledge. So I challenge all the rest of the board members, administrators, parent, anybody who's here tonight to make whatever you can contribution so that these kids can go to Carnegie Hall. So there you go. Absolutely. Yeah. How do you hire out? There you go. Okay. All right. So again, that is kappachoir.com/donate.
So excited to be back up here. To email myself, Jenny Keffer, at rps205.com, and we'll get you scheduled.
All right. Fabulous. Thank you for being here. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I know. Okay. Oh, I'm not sure we could top that.
Let's go. Who gets to go next?
Okay.
Speaker number 2.
All right. Our next speaker is Renee Anderson, to be followed by Sarah Shiro.
Hi, I'm Renee Anderson. I've worked as a paraprofessional for over 10 years in early childhood. I really enjoy working with this age group, but I'm here today to address concerns that we have in early childhood. We are often abused. We are hit, kicked, butt-headed, spat upon, bitten, verbally abused, called Mother F, and sometimes verbally threatened too. When this problem comes, there's no consequences for these children. We can make calls home, we can send letters, but they come back the next day to do it again. There's nothing done to these kids. Early childhood children cannot be suspended. CPI can't be done because they're too young. If this behavior took place in any other grade, these kids would be suspended or expelled. According to the Student Code of Conduct, Handbook, page 5, the staff has a right to work in an atmosphere free from verbal and physical threats and abuse. So why doesn't this apply to early childhood? On page 6, for pre-K, it states that behavior interventions instead should be more for the care of the child, skill building, and safety of other students. Well, so what do you suggest we do when they're throwing books, knocking over shelves and chairs? How do we keep the other children safe? My last incident came from a child who's almost 5. He's 4 foot tall, over 90 pounds. I was hit many times, butt-headed, kicked, called the Mother F. That the same day this child did this to other staff members. It's not funny when you compare your bruises at the lunch table. We're asking for a safe work environment, guidelines on what to do with different situations. No one should have to put up with this kind of abuse. We as parents certainly do not get paid enough for this. So please care enough about your early childhood staff to include us in the Code of Conduct book. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Sarah Shiro, to be followed by Jack Moore.
I would like to thank the members of the board for taking an interest in the recent Kappa Middle School events. I was inspired to hear that the Lion King Jr. made such a lasting impression. I ask you to keep that in mind as we evaluate the effectiveness of the Kappa program. I am here tonight as a Kappa teacher to represent my students and their hard work and dedication to our program. It is reckless to make assumptions about the demographic data and dedication that our students have, or that our teachers have. Student entrance data is far more valuable in determining the effectiveness of any special program. We need to ask how the program is growing students and at what rate. That can help us make informed decisions on what we need to change. Then we will actually know what our successes are and our areas of improvement. Taking data out of context and making assumptions simply does us no good. Opinions are useless without evidence and investigation. Our teachers feel the same sense of urgency and are passionate about making improvements to our program. As an ELA instructor, I use district curriculum, resources, and initiatives. Arts integration within our capacity cannot be held responsible for closing achievement gaps that students enter the program with. Special programs are simply not here to elevate the district's scores. The district sets the tone for our success. We can turn to the well-developed research of Dr. W. Edwards Deming, which explains that 94% of troubles in an organization belong to the system, not special causes. The same is true for education. We can talk about demographics, we can talk about who comes ready to learn, yet the issue we face must be addressed with improvements to our systems and our structures through true improvement science. Thank you.
Try that again with the microphone on. Jack Moore, to be followed by Kristen Nichols.
Good evening. My name is Jack Moore. I'm a social studies teacher at West Middle School for the Kappa program. First, I'd like to state that Ms. Skiro is an amazing teacher, highly respected, and recently just got an excellent rating by Mr. Davis, our building principal, which I can attest to is very difficult to achieve. So today is my mother's birthday. And so I called her today and I told her I planned on coming here tonight. She told me that people on school boards do this out of their civic pride. And I don't really gain much out of the experience other than complaints. So thank you. But this is kind of important as to why I'm here. Because I'm here to talk about a pretty touchy subject, teacher retention. Why is this something I want to talk about tonight? Well, because last meeting it was the theory of this board that readiness to learn is the most important factor for student achievement. I'm here to tell you that you're exactly right. However, when 1 in 5 classrooms lose a certified teacher at some point in the year, it really doesn't matter how ready that kid is to learn when there's nobody there to teach them. I believe we need to start looking at test scores as a result of a systemic problem, not individual finger pointing. We are only as good as our weakest link. Our weakest link are those many classrooms that do not have consistent teacher in them to teach procedures and skills, not special programs. The point I want to share tonight is that this district's highest priority right now needs to be teacher retention and not test scores. If teachers stay in the classroom, you will see improvements. Thank you.
Sorry, I keep turning my mic off. Kristen Nichols, to be followed by Sarah Dorner.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I am a para. Actually, I work with Renee, who just spoke, and I also wanted to talk about safety in our schools. I wanted to touch a little bit more on what she was saying. It's not just about consequences, it's also about having the tools that we need to be successful in the classroom. Para's number one priority should be the safety of our students. And if we are busy getting hit and kicked and bit and called the B word and the F word and being told that they're going to bring a hammer to school and kill us, we can't do our job. We need more paras to help us. We need consequences for those students. And we need to know that those consequences are going to be followed through. Because when I was injured, it was a 2-foot-tall little kid. He weighs less than 40 pounds, and he sprained my knee by kicking me full force. And I have been on light duty for 4 weeks, and I will be on light duty for another week and a half. I cannot chase after students that try to run from me. I can't bend down to tie a shoe. I can't do my job properly because I have been injured on the job because a kid was allowed to do this to me, and there was no consequences for him. He was told, I'm going to call your mom, and he said, haha, do it. And that is not okay. He does not fear his action, the consequences of his actions, and we need to be able to stop him and other students who feel like it's okay to disrespect teachers and paras. If we don't do this, paras are not going to stay. Talking about longevity with teachers, paras aren't staying either. They don't want to be kicked and hit for years and years and not have anything done about it.
Thank you, Kristen. Sarah Dorna is next.
Does it work? Okay, yep. Sorry. I'm Sarah Dorner. I'm here to speak to you tonight in my capacity as the labor representative for AFSCME Council 31, Locals 1275 and 3210, also known as the bus drivers and nutrition service workers. And it's a huge honor for me to get to come here tonight. I know that our contracts are on the agenda for your vote, and we are asking that you please vote yes. But I do have to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Rockford. I went to McIntosh School, then Washington Elementary, then West Middle School, graduated from Auburn High School, and I moved away. And when I saw this job with AFSCME Council 31, advertised for Rockford, it was my dream job. To come back and be a union rep in my home community was my dream job. And when I finally got assigned these units in September, I can't tell you how much it's meant to me to get to know the woman who smiles at my daughter every day when she's in line for lunch, or the woman who helped me when I was teary-eyed putting my kindergartner on the bus for the first time ever and got her there safely and back. So I'm just, the employees at RPS 205, I get a little choked up. They're really wonderful people, and they're part of our community. And I'm so proud of the contract that we came together in a very collaborative fashion and negotiated. It's a good agreement. It was overwhelmingly ratified by both units, and so we hope you'll do the same tonight. Thank you very much.
Nice. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. At this time, I would like to ask for any board member comments. Mr. Rounds.
So happy birthday to the mother of the gentleman who said it was, tonight is my dad's 89th birthday, and I'm here as well, so they share a birthday. And we're both here, I think, for the same reason, because I think we both want to see kids learn. And I want to make it clear, I mean, there was a reference to finger pointing. Nobody's doing a finger pointing exercises here. I think what the discussion was is that we can look at the data, and that's the only thing that we can look at. We can look at the numbers that we have. We can see kids in our district, compare them to kids in other districts around the state. who have similar characteristics, and we can see that we don't seem to be doing as good a job. And that's what we're here for. And, we do need to talk about causes. We need to talk about root causes. Teacher retention, great point. That could be an issue. But we can't just ignore it. We have to talk about it. And we have to acknowledge that we need to do a better job, because that's what we're all here for.
Any other board member comments? I have 3. First of all, I want to remind you again of that GoFundMe website for the Kappa kids, kappachoir.com/donate to make a donation for the Carnegie Hall trip. Second, I do want to recognize our bus drivers and nutrition staff and our paras, because they are part of the team that help to drive student achievement. We have to have bus drivers to get our kids to school. We have to have nutrition folks who feed our kids and take care of their needs for nutrition. And we have to have paras who are in the classroom helping with children. So they all play a key role in the success of our students. And the last thing I wanted to mention was that I got a request from a RISA teacher just recently that both RISA and Eisenhower have completed training of their student ambassadors that are doing the student-led tours. And they are in need of people to come and tour their buildings. So I'm going to sign up. I haven't been to RISA for a while, so I would encourage other board members and community members, if you'd like to have a student-led tour of one of our schools, please contact the principals at those buildings. For RISA, it's Ben Stover. For Eisenhower, it's Jeff Carlson. And sign up to do a student-led tour, and they would appreciate our help and our involvement. So I would add those 3 things. So thank you. We'll now move on to the consent items. The meeting minutes of January 28th, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, contracts under $10,000, construction bid request log and travel, the AFSCME 1275 bus drivers tentative agreement, the AFSCME 3210 nutrition services tentative agreement, the memorandum of understanding on RPS family attendance, the recruitment incentives, and the freedom of information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Connor?
7D.
See any other lights on, so I'll have the coordinator then call the roll for the approval of the consent items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Enthusiastically, yes.
All right.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, I'll now take a motion and a second to approve item 7D, which is the recruitment incentives.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Questions and discussion? Mr. Connor.
Yeah, this is fairly straightforward. I wanted to make sure what we have is a situation where we're deeply concerned about teacher retention and, of course, the recruitment of teachers. And this specific item talks about really incentives for teachers and addresses directly the teacher shortage. So it's what, $200,000 worth of incentives, I believe. And so the point is that we're concerned about these kinds of things. We intend to do more. I would say it's an area that we need to look into. But I just wanted to point out to everybody that there are some things in place, and this is one of them.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? All right, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 7D, the recruitment incentives.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our closed session consent items, including the following: the HR organizational report and addendum, and the closed session consent items for student discipline. Unless otherwise modified below, the board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Student 4351 is expelled for the remainder of this school year through 2021 school year and until February 11th, 2022. Student 4349, 4350, 4352, and 4353 are expelled for the remainder of this school year and through the first semester of the next school year. And the following students are receiving EIAs, expulsions in abeyance: student 8015, 8047, 8048, 8054, 8055, student 8056, 8057, 8058, 8059, student 8060, 8061, 8062, 8063, 8065, 8068, 8069, student 8070, student 8071, 8072, 8073, and student 8074. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rollins.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any consent items the board wishes to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
She stepped out.
Oh, okay. Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor? Abstain?
Abstain, thank
There you
you.
go. Okay.
Jeez.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 absent from the vote, and 1 abstain.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to our next agenda item, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Mr. Scrivano. I'd like to ask Dr. Wolf to come up to present our charter school report. Just to contextualize this for our audience and our home audience, this is now our 5th presentation on our schools as we reviewed. We have so far done an overall review of our high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, and now we're moving on, and our special programs, and now we're moving on to review our charter schools performance. We also looked at the district's performance as a whole over the course of 2 meetings, and last week we spent a little time talking about some of our strategies for district-wide improvement. Now I'd like Dr. Wolf to take the floor to update us on the performance of our charters based on the FY19 school year results. Dr. Wolf, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Jarrett, and thank you, members of the board. You had such a warm reception for the Auburn students, I thought that I would sing my apology for the data transmission not getting to you. And then I was told I should be kind, so there will be no song. But I do, I do apologize. You know, it would be sure if I could turn back time, I could get it out on time. But you got the reports today. I was out of town. I thought the transmission had happened. So as always, I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions via email or at a future meeting. Of course, our charter schools provide one more arrow in the quiver for improving student achievement, for honoring our vision, which is to be the first choice for all families. And as Dr. Jarrett said, we're positioned, we're number 5 in going through these various grade level reports. At the next board meeting, the Early Childhood Centers and Program will give a report, and then at the Committee of the Whole in March, we will make a renewal recommendation to you about Jackson Charter School going forward. So there's a good deal of per school, individual school information in the packet that you were sent today. And there are 2 basic reports for each of the schools. One of them is the charter performance report that we had negotiated And so we've updated that with 2019 data. You'll get the full report on Jackson on March 3rd. There's also what the Illinois State Board of Ed produces as their static report card. And then we have from foundation to current enrollment history for each of the charter schools in there. When we look at the charter school data trends, I think it's important to note that we have taken elements that are required for charter schools, the IAR, the Illinois Assessment of Readiness, and those sorts of things, along with what is in their contract, the annual audit and items like that. And so we are looking at their data, trying to preserve the two pillars of charter schools in Illinois. Autonomy, they don't answer to the central office outside of the contract and law. And accountability, which we have gotten much better on, we think, in the last year and a half. And so we can assure that. They also reinforce, I think you're going to see through the broad data trends, this concept that growth matters as long as you're growing towards the right target. And we have the charter schools demonstrating a majority of increasing growth, increasing proficiency. So we're going to look at chronic absenteeism. And we're looking at chronic absenteeism because there's a good deal of research that if students aren't there, they can't learn. We'll look at proficiency on 3rd through 8th grade testing. Legacy does have high school students, but not a sufficient number to have it reported. So they have under 10 11th graders who would take that. You'll see growth, our student group, performance trends, and mobility at the charter schools. So you see the bottom in the bottom left-hand corner. We put the state data as a text box so that you had that for reference, but because some of the numbers would really skew the chart, and we want to show the variance in performance between the different schools. So that's why you have that there, and then we have the district, and then Galapagos, Legacy, Jackson, looking at the schools in alphabetical order. Chronic absenteeism is the number of students who are absent for any reason, excused or unexcused, who cross over that threshold of missing 10% of the school year. So at Jackson last year, half of their students missed 10% or more of the school year. Legacy was the lowest at 25, Galapagos 27, and the district average was 35. All three of our charters increased in proficiency in English language arts. Again, the state numbers are in the bottom left of your chart, the district, and then the schools in alphabetical order. It's interesting that they have generally done the trend that the district did, dropping either 17 and or 18, rebounding in 19. Both Galapagos and Jackson reached their highest point in 4 years of these assessments. In math, we see some of the same trends. Galapagos is leading the pack in terms of averages. Legacy has gone up every year, and Jackson has been very low and has been inconsistent in their trend. Science is going to have larger jumps at the charter schools. Only 5th and 8th grade students take the science assessment. And if you figure that there are about 300 students in the K-8 school, there's a very small number of students, so your percentages are going to fluctuate more than others. But just like ELA and math, you see Galapagos leading the pack, Legacy in the middle, and Jackson working to improve. A lot has been talked about on the board floor about growth. And so the 50th percentile on student growth is where you want to be, 50% or higher. And so 2 of the charter schools improved their growth percentile. Galapagos, again, leads the way at 50%, and we saw their proficiency increase. So growing towards the right target matters. I think is the story there. I think it's also important to note that as we heard, readiness to learn in those items matter. The state methodology for how you compute student growth percentile gives the school credit for movement made for each and every child. And they compare students who started off at the same place on a starting line. It's not like they're comparing the 99th percentile of first percentile. And so it really suggests more of a value add at the school level. And so that's why you really want to pay attention to that growth percentile. It's like students, year over year growth towards the proficiency target. And here you have that same system on your chart. The district improved in its IR percentile growth. Galapagos did as well, and actually got to 53, the 53rd percentile. And again, I'm going to reinforce that growth leading to proficiency. Here you have the subgroup. The state is trying to change our vocabulary, I learned yesterday. They want us to talk about student groups. Subgroup has been around for 20 years, so student groups. If there is no colored line for a school, it means that they did not hit at least 10 students in that group who was in a tested population. And so to preserve student privacy, the state doesn't publish any number if there are under 10 students in any group. I think you can note the trends there. And mobility is frequently spoken about. The state has run sevens each of the last 3 years. Our district rate is about double that. You notice an interesting trend at the charter schools. They all peaked last year in their mobility. Can't tell you why. Again, you have small populations, so a 10-student swing can affect a percentage more than a 29,000 student district. So that data leads us to make some conclusions about the strengths. All 3 charter schools improved their proficiency in English language arts last year, and that came on 2 out of 3 improving their growth percentile. We think that those are good indicators. On the state summative designation to meet the Every Student Succeeds Act requirements, 2 of 3 are rated as commendable, and 2 of 3 increased their math proficiency. Chronic absenteeism increased to 2 out of 3, and we see that as a weakness. Ms. Baker, the principal at Jackson, will tell you that it's a major factor in their school improvement plan, and you will see it in the renewal application in a couple of weeks. They know that, and they're very concerned. All of their staff is involved in that, but that's the weakness. And proficiency is below the state average at all of them. So we can talk about growth and we can talk about improvements in proficiency, but it is also important to note that nobody has caught the state average in this sector. We think there are certainly plenty of opportunities for continued improvement at the schools. I want to remind everybody that they have autonomy on implementing their program components. They get to choose many of the things. Jackson decided to contract with ECRA for work out of the 1003A School Improvement Program, and they were able to do all of that within 2 days, right? So they have great autonomy and flexibility to move very quickly, and so they're using that. We also see an opportunity that they have room to grow their enrollment. They have both physical space in their facilities, and they have contractual space. Each of them have a limit in their enrollment. That's on the enrollment chart that was in your packet today. And so they have room to grow. And so if they have continued success, they can do that. They also can continue to focus on growing their program implementation. So not only do they have autonomy, but they know that they need to get better at each of their components. And I think there are a couple of different ways that we see that playing out. At Galapagos, I call it a relentless focus on curriculum implementation. Teachers there don't write lesson plans. They're given lesson plans, which they annotate, they turn in, and then they're going to have 1 or 2 visits during the week from a coach who then will turn in his or her notes to their dean, who will then meet with each teacher on Friday. So a school that has a 46% teacher retention rate last year, which is the highest in 3 years, also has the highest scores in the sector, right? So they chose this relentless focus on implementing their curriculum with fidelity so that students get grade level instruction. Legacy chose a different route. A few years ago, they decided to pursue International Baccalaureate accreditation. And they achieved that for their middle school program. And where you're starting to see improving test results at Legacy is at their middle school level. So they're working now and moving that IB program into the lower grades because they think a holistic program would yield better results for students. And then at Jackson, they severed ties with their CICS, Chicago International Charter School, went to a more local control, and have really gotten focused on looking at student data. So Mr. Williams and Ms. Baker can tell you about dialogue that they have with teachers on a consistent basis about test results, small assessments in the classroom, week in and week out, and they continue to work on refining that part of their program. We also see an opportunity for informing their practice. About 1.5 years ago, we started shopping with charter operators what the elements that are on the charter performance report. And they became hardwired into the contract for Galapagos and Legacy this year. We anticipate them being hardwired into Jackson's renewal contract if you approve that. And again, that includes proficiency, it includes growth, it includes student metrics, governance and finance issues, and then we look at their enrollment, because their enrollment impacts our facility plans and their finances. So those are areas for opportunity we see. And there are some threats. So increasing mobility rates could be a threat. We don't know if last year's rates were a one-off. We'll continue to observe that. But we adjust their quarterly payments, their per capita tuition receipts, based on enrollment and attendance. And so they hire the teacher for the year, but if they have more students move out than move in, our funding mechanism is a little bit of a threat. They still have the full price of the teacher, but now only 21 students, not 22 or 23 in the classroom. And then staff turnover. All of the charter-operated schools have a teacher retention rate below the district average. Galapagos has the lowest at 46%. So we believe that those are potential threats to our charter sector. So what's next? We think that letting the conversation continue to focus on the charter performance report. These are the items that we believe to be important. These are the items that you must observe under federal and state law. So focusing on those accountability structures will be a critical part of our work this year and going forward. And this is when you know that you've gotten somebody's attention. One of the charter schools called about 10 days ago wanting to see their charter performance report updated, and we said, we'll be presenting it to the board at this meeting. So they're calling to get the results. So we got somebody's attention, and we think that's good. We also need to deepen partnerships. We have a student population that supports more staff so we can specialize. I now feel really adept at talking about statute and regulation and guidance and dear colleague letters and now informational documents out of the Department of Ed, right? They, with 300 or so students, can't afford that. And so how do we help them while honoring their autonomy and holding them accountable? So we want to continue to do that. And we research and implement best practices. So we've been a part with the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. Dr. Jarrett and I went to the Illinois Network of Charter School last year. Susan Fumo and I continued to work with SchoolWorks on renewal site visits. And so we want to learn from a wide variety of people to help our charter sector continue to improve. And with that, I say thank you for listening, and can I answer any questions?
Questions for Dr. Wolf? Mr. Rollins?
I don't really have questions, but I do have a lot of comments.
Or comments.
So if we can start with slide 13, this is kind of a sideshow. So we have been talking a lot recently about mobility. So this is an interesting slide. So we're talking about 3 programs that have no zones with 100% busing, and 2 of those schools have higher mobility rates than the district's average. The other interesting thing, so my question is, when we talk about mobility and we talk about that this is something we need to address and how do we address, and that we need to solve, is it something that we can really even solve within the district? Are we talking about inter-school mobility? Are we talking about mobility inside and, into and out of the district? Did you want to address that, Dr. Jarrett?
Yeah, I do. I think we're going to have to do a much deeper dive as we bring our proposal forward for board policy, but I think comparing for example, Legacy, Galapagos, and the third school, Jackson, to the district average may be problematic because the district average represents the entire district. If you look at the students that our 3 charter partners provide, they probably have more in common from a student demographic standpoint with Auburn feeder pattern schools in terms of a lot of they do serve students from all over the district, but I think some of those in and out of the district mobility issues. So you do see, compared to some of our highest mobility schools, slightly lower rates. So I think we have to have a really open and really detailed conversation about whether it does make sense to address try some different remedies to address mobility. And certainly this is something on the other side of the argument in terms of the fact that these schools are boundary-less and still have very high mobility issues. I think it's an excellent point and something we'll have to throw into the debate.
And the other thing, just on that same point, is that the school, which for all of the 4 years has had the highest mobility rate, has the best results, which is counterintuitive, I think you would say. To address, to your point, Dr. Jarrett, about that these schools have demographics like the Auburn feeder pattern, that was actually going to be my next point, which is similar to the point that I was also making about the special programs. To me, we're starting with the cream of the crop here, and I'll say it again. When I say starting with the cream of the crop, first off, this isn't even a data point that gets measured. You're starting with parents who care, parents who, or guardians who care enough about their child's education to select a program to send them to, or a special school. I was a little bit surprised. All 3 of these schools have low income rates significantly below the district average. And that's an apples to apples comparison. I'm not comparing to state averages where they're calculating it differently. They're like 20 percentage points below the district average. The rest of it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. One of them has a very high chronic absenteeism. But a couple of them have low mobility rates or lower mobility rates than the district average. 2 of the 3 have lower percentage of children with disabilities. Again, using sort of the same analysis that I applied to special programs, I would expect better results out of these. And I wouldn't compare them with our district average, and I wouldn't get excited if they approach our district average or maybe exceed our district average a little bit. Given the kids they're starting with, I really would think that we'd be getting better results from these programs. I mean, there's nothing good you can say about Jackson. Galapagos is at least approaching and in some instances exceeding district average. I mean, the one bright spot I saw in Legacy, they actually do a little bit better job with their African-American students, and they're beating us on math, but I think they're behind us on ELA. So, you know, I'm back to the accountability issue, which we all need to figure out. We need these programs to do better. And I don't know how we do that, other than I think we need to have that pretty close conversation when it comes time to reauthorize these programs.
Thank you. The leadership heard you. Mr. Williams sat through the charter renewal work last year, even though Jackson was not up at that time, and in subsequent conversations, they deeply feel the urgency on student achievement. And last year was the first time that we put this performance report together. They're paying attention to it, and it's proficiency and growth that get them 75% of the points on this. They heard you, and now they have the autonomy and the finances to deliver.
Mr. Connor, I think you were next.
Yeah, well, I have a slightly different view on this. I think the one number that I will point out is the enrollment numbers, particularly at Jackson. I want to say, was it 4 years ago? It's almost in half. So the other two were fairly steady. So that number I thought was concerning, and I don't know what the answer is from the management at that school, but that would be my first sort of question comment.
So they made a strategic decision to not serve 6th or 8th grade students going into this year.
Yeah, no, I
and
saw
that
it.
was 122 students of the decline.
Oh.
And what they had not anticipated, 6th or 8th grade.
Right.
What they had not anticipated was they also lost about 20 students. They can't pinpoint it, but they thought about 20 students whose parents had to move the 6th or 8th grade child, so they also moved the other child.
Yeah.
Even though they would be going to different schools anyways. But, I mean, those were the numbers that we could verify, the 6-8 and the other.
Yeah, and help me out on that one. Did they not go through 12?
Their charter plan allowed for that, but
they
they
didn't have
never went
students.
beyond 8th grade.
Okay.
And then as they severed with CICS, they decided that they would do better with K-5.
Okay. So if I look at the Galapagos numbers, I have to say, I mean, I obviously don't have an explanation, but their chronic absenteeism went down. It's below the district average. And legacy, by the way, is also below the average. Their actual proficiency at Galapagos, at least for 19, beat the district. So, that was in ELA, and in math, again, actually 2 years in a row, Galapagos beat the district average. Seems to be doing reasonably well in growth. It's at or over 50%. So I mean, I want all these things to improve, but I think in general, you have to say that, generally speaking, those numbers, seem fairly acceptable. I think the puzzling part for me, when I look at the student groupings performance, not subgroup, is that, man, again, I'm going to say, Galapagos and Hispanics goes quite a bit over. The other numbers are below, which would be concerning. Legacy is below on all of them. Jackson is way below on all. So there's a number of questions here. on that. And then on the mobility, it looks like there's a fairly high rate of mobility in these schools, although, again, Galapagos has a higher mobility rate than the district. So I think overall my point would be that whatever you think of the charters, I mean, they are our schools, and I think you're quite correct in saying that it seemed like Galapagos and Legacy heard that, and that Jackson got the message even though they weren't up at that time. But I think it's fair to say that whatever standards we want to talk about has to apply equally across the schools. And so I think that in terms of that reporting, just like we're expecting the scorecard by each school to address some of this, I think, again, you have to apply the same, at least they don't actually respond to us as a district in that sense because they are independent. But I think something of accountability has to be there. Now, having said all this, as people have heard me say many times, I'm not a fan of tests only. I'd be the first to say that. So I'm saying this in context that bringing out the points of some of the charters and understanding that we really have to make sure that whatever points we're making applies to both.
And on your point on accountability, I want to remind you what the board did last year. They approved a 3-year renewal, which is significantly less than the standard, quote unquote, 5-year renewal. And so that delivered a very strong message. And we don't anticipate going beyond that in our next recommendation either.
Mr. Dixon, I think you're next.
Thank you. I wanted to just kind of jump on what Mr. Rollins and Mr. Connor said about accountability. And you kind of touched on it. But if you go to what's next, you pinpoint what are our accountability structures. And so what are our accountability structure?
Thank you. So what was part of the renewal application and became part of the contract in the state certification process was a multi-page, a 6-page document, dashboard, and then supporting information. Each line has its own page going deeper in depth. You can see the 3-year average rolling on the front one, and it includes, so 75% is on student proficiency, student growth, and the high school measures. None of our schools have sufficient students to trigger any numbers in the high school measures. So all of their points are in that academics are on student proficiency on the IAR and on their growth as computed by the Illinois State Board of Ed on the IAR. Then they pick up 10 points in their enrollment to contract percent. Did their plan actually happen in real life, right? So if I asked you for 1,200 seats and I only got 400 filled, that's a significant variance. And we need to hold them to that. It is part of their financial plan, is part of our facility plan. You know, we don't have a ready capacity to take 300 students at the elementary level tomorrow, right? So it matters to us that their plan that is approved actually happens. So there's something about that. Student voice was a culture element. The Illinois State Board of Ed says that student rates on the 5 Essentials survey will count for the state accountability system. And actually there's a good deal of research that as your students say the school is, so the school is. And so we put that into ours. And then the governance and finance. So there are schools in the great state of Illinois, charter schools, that closed down because they ran out of money. That's really injurious to students and families. So we keep a close eye on a quarterly basis to their cash flow status so that families are not surprised by a closure. And then the governance and compliance is another 5 points in the accountability structure. Are you meeting your IEP requirements? Are you doing the home language survey for English language learners? Are you meeting the whole raft of state mandates? And so that all goes into that. We're up, and then there's 5 points on the year that they're up for renewal, the renewal site visit, where we go and we visit every classroom. We do classroom observations. That becomes a report. We do focus groups with every stakeholder group in the school, and that gets rolled up into a summative score, and that goes on the report. Then we update that with the items that change every year, their proficiency, growth, et cetera. And then the other part of the accountability structure that we codified in their contract last year was a notice structure. So in order to close a school, there are certain things prescribed in law, notice of potential revocation, et cetera. We now have that in our system. And so we reduced the length of the contract renewal. 3 to 5 years is considered best practice for school improvement. They said they were working on it. We recommended, the board approved, 3 years. If they're not improving, the board gets another chance at real accountability. We're not going to charter you again, right? That's kind of the ultimate accountability there. And so we put that tool back in the toolbox for the board more quickly than it had been previously.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Connor talked about, kind of hit on it, the chronic absenteeism with Jackson. Did they ever tell you what their plan, what they're deciding, what they're going to do to address that?
So one of the things that they implemented right away is every staff member has a list of students that they call. We missed you today. We noticed that you've missed 2 days this week. What are the barriers? What's keeping you from attending? And then they aggregate that information to their culture deans, who then take the next steps. They're trying to keep absenteeism low, but then we'll go through the truancy route where that's called for, et cetera. So far more staff member, student, parent interaction on a very frequent basis, and then they're aggregating that into more formal structures, is the number one thing that they say that they started in September.
Mr. Rollins.
Yeah, this isn't going to come as a surprise to anybody here, but I disagree with Mr. Connor that the district average is our target. We're below the state average by 18.5 points on ELA proficiency and 17.8 points on math proficiency. And, people say, well, that's because our kids are different. And there's truth of that. We have in Rockford, we have some deep poverty, and we have schools that are struggling to deal with that deep poverty, and there are reasons why we're not currently at the state average. What I have been talking about, both with the special programs and tonight, is what if we're looking at schools that seem to have student populations that look a lot like the state average? The demographics are a lot like the state average. Now we're looking at performances that are 18 points below state average. With no demographic explanation, I don't think our district average is our target. I mean, we'd like to get everybody up there, but certainly, we need to figure out an explanation for some of these results, and the students aren't the explanation. So what is the explanation?
This is more probably an authorization question, but, I get this packet from the IASB every year that's about 20 pages long with all the new school laws that have gone into effect. The one that caught my eye dealt with charter school boards. And so a new law has gone into effect, I'm assuming Ms. Hoadley probably knows this, that requires a charter school, because they have their own independent boards, that now requires that one of their board members be a parent of a current active student in their program. So is that something that we're addressing with the charter schools because it's law now or whatever? So,
Yes, we are, sir.
Okay,
All
Harry.
of them met that statutory requirement.
I think there might have been some other law changes regarding charter schools as well, but
And the Illinois State Charter School Commission will end on June 30th, and authorizing duties for their 11 schools will go to ISB. If anybody needs a job, they're hiring in their Chicago office. They want 2 or 3 staff. Because they're going to do the work that I do here for their 11 schools. All of their boards have met that requirement. Galapagos even voted in a second parent who will begin in the fall. And Ms. Goldsmith, Yoshika, and I share going to some charter school board meetings.
yeah, I don't have a comment whether or not that's a good idea or not a bad idea because, to me, it's more about the willingness to serve and willingness to do the work than whether or not, you meet certain requirements. I mean, most of the board members here have children in the district or in my case, grandchildren in the district, it's really about having people who have a vested interest in the success of the school. And so I just want to make sure that we have that compliance issue and being addressed or whatever. So any other comments or questions for Dr. Wolf? Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on then to our action items, and the first one is 12A, Public School Works, a state-mandated training program. This was presented at our last board meeting. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussions? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12A, Public School Works.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our second item for action item tonight is the Unified Talent Contract that was presented by HR. Is our motion a second to approve item 12B?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12B.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, our third item is the 12C, which is the Housing for Aspiring Teachers that Mr. Zediker presented. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12C. Unless, Mrs. McCulloch, did you have a question on that one? Okay, all right.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next item is item 12D, which is the Premier Speakers Bureau contract for Teachers Institute Day Speaker. Is there a motion and a second to approve item 12D?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion? Okay. Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12D.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our fifth item tonight is the professional development for K-5 and 9 through 12 teachers for National Geographic. Is there a motion and a second to approve item 12E?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 12E.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next items are items 12F through 12L, which are the board policy revisions. Everybody okay with voting on them all together? All right, thank you. All right, I'll take a motion and a second to vote on these as a combined 12F through 12L.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Dixon. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have a roll on the approval of items 12F through 12L.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Now we're on to new business. Mrs. Hoadley, board policy revision for 7.270, student administering medications.
This policy has been updated to reflect changes in Illinois law. It sets forth procedures for students to use medically infused marijuana products under the supervision of designated caregivers or under the supervision of administrators, designated administrators, or other caregivers, or to be given the medication by such individuals. So it really just sets forth the requirements.
Comments or questions?
Do?
Ms. McCulloch.
Do we have a policy for staff members who have it for medicinal purposes? Is there any change in the?
There is a policy that covers staff members that I addressed the last time, but that has not been changed. It's still prohibited. And we do reasonably.
For medicinal. It's still-
On school grounds, that would be correct. It is prohibited, and or to be under the influence of it on school grounds. We do have, we do reasonably accommodate individuals in other ways.
All right. So this will come up for a vote on our February 25th board meeting. Our last item is always other board member or administrator action steps, and I'm just going to list 3 that I'm going to do. One is I'm going to send thank you notes to the three principals who presented at our last committee of the whole meeting. I thought it was great that we had Don Rundle here, Maurice, and Jake from Westview, and they sat through a long time to be here to talk to us about, academic improvement items, action items that are going on in their buildings with their teachers, and I think that was great to have them here. I'm going to remind you about Kappa Choir. What is it? kappachoir.com/donate. So I'm going to make my donation by tomorrow. All right, and I'm going to sign up and encourage all of you to sign up for some school tours. So any other items that we have? All right, I'll take a motion for adjournment then.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned at 8:19.
You guys really picked up.
I know.